Great, so thank you very much, everyone. So today I really want to first thank our distinguished panel. On my left here I have Guillaume, Eliet, Javier, Hernani, Kevin Sampson, and Sam Riley, and I'm really excited to have them all here today, and hopefully we'll have a great discussion. I think that, the pace of change in all aspects of life, including business, is accelerating. We hear a lot about this. It's not just a perception, but things are actually moving faster than they ever have before. And over the last few days, we've heard about how this is also being driven as a result of technology innovation, the emergence of new forms of risk and changes in the market, not to mention the triple threat of uncertain macroeconomic environments, heightened regulatory expectations, and a volatile geopolitical landscape. There's a lot of examples of this: persistent inflation, rising interest rates, an evolving regulatory landscape, disparate responses to digital innovation on a global basis, a need for continued focus on resiliency, risk management as financial markets become more interconnected. There's increased investments in ESG capabilities. There's intense cost pressures coupled with a desire to become more efficient. So for us, it's really easy, right, guys? Just consider the topics that were covered this week. And as we think about the future, CSDs really are well positioned to drive positive change for the industry, lead the initiatives to mitigate risk, deliver value, deliver a better client experience. And today we're going to hear from our panel on the key trends that are shaping the long-term vision of the global CSDs, how they're approaching striking the balance of innovating, transforming, and also executing on their strategic roadmap to continue to meet the evolving needs of clients, the industry, while also continuing to provide what we're so well known for as high-performant, resilient systems and excellence in risk management. So with that, I'm going to kick off, and a question for everyone on the panel. Let's start with how each of your firms have approached and set your future vision. So if you could just describe the role that you see CSDs playing in the future, how market evolution is shaping that vision for each of you, and what things will not change, or maybe things that will inform that future strategy.
I start.
Yes, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Yes, an impressive list of changes. So it's probably an amazing time for CSD. But I would like to start by what is not changing. And what is not changing is what we are fundamentally, providing a provider of confidence to the markets, provider of confidence to issuers, to investors, provider of security, overseeing the assets in custody, providing finality to settlement. This will not change. Provider of confidence and also provider of connection. I think these two elements are really probably the basics on which we will build our future vision. So starting really by what will remain. But of course, well, you have named a lot of the challenges that we have in front of us in terms of, I would say, all the discussion that we had across these 3 days around DLT, around T+1, around ESG, all this topic. But maybe let me name two of what I say that kind of big challenges for us. The first one being fragmentation, and the second one being data. Fragmentation for me is key, as we see that we remain in a landscape where there are a lot of, I would say, existing fragmentation from regulatory purpose on many topics, and we have discussed this question of integration yesterday. We have also fragmentation coming from DLT innovation, with all the experiments popping up, I would say, in limited bubbles in a way with no interconnection. And we see also geopolitics fragmenting also the landscape. And I think that is something that we need to consider, of course, but for which CSD can also offer a response. And the second big topic I would say is data, but it is something that we have already discussed a lot during these panels. Of course, CSDs are well placed as central players to use data, to organize data, to store data, and do something with it. And it is really what has shaped our vision in Euroclear to be really a promoter of a new way of using data, shifting from the, I would say, sequential way of transferring data to a more centralized way. But we will probably discuss this later on during this panel.
Great, thank you. And Javier, at SIX, how are you guys thinking about the future? What does that look like to you?
Thank you, Jenny. I feel in this moment in a wrap-up session, to be honest, because we heard a lot, we talked about this yesterday night, in the sense that many panels have talked a lot about the future and the vision. So to some extent, I think in addition to put our own ideas here, they are very influenced as well by what others have said about the future. I see the future of CSDs as a brilliant one. I honestly think this is an invention that happened not so long ago. I mean, we don't date back to the Medici's, Florence Renaissance, no? So this is not such a old construct, but has been extremely successful, in my opinion. Has gone through very tough financial crisis with extremely good delivery, no? So sometimes when I hear people talking about what is the future of CSDs, will CSDs disappear in the DLT construct, whatever, I tend to, I'm a big fan of technology. When I hear DLT, is it DLT for distributed ledger technology, or is it for diluted responsibility? So the responsibility is in the hands of CSDs to make all this thing happen and work, and to dilute it is not a good idea. And honestly, I think what CSD have to look into the future is to have how to enhance services, such as what Guillaume was just mentioning. I think efficiency is a must in what we need to do. Connectivity is a must, and standardization is a must. Because alongside those lines, together with technology, we can reduce operational risk, which in my opinion is one of the biggest topics that we have. I think if you compare that to trading, to our friends of the value chain in trading, the standardization, connectivity, and simplicity of trading is much higher than what happens in the post-trade arena. And I think CSDs should be a very big leverage for that in terms of making things easier. If you listen to the buy side, I'm sure all of us listen to our clients, the buy side is not happy with the complexity of what we have in the post-trade industry. So that, I think, is one of the big leverages to be meaningful in the future and continue to deliver this very important service. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Kevin, how is TMX and CDS approaching the future?
Yeah, great, thanks, Jennifer. And maybe just for those, it's hard to, CDS can be conflated quite easily with CSD, so just for frame of reference, I'm president of CDS, which is Canada's National Depository Clearing and Settlement Agency, and we're part of the TMX group, which, as many of you know, operate a variety of equity, fixed income, derivative markets, and related post-trade services around the world. And so I think I might just take a little bit of a different approach in terms of not go right to the tagline in terms of what the vision is, but maybe take you through a little bit of our thought process and the things that we consider that are driving that vision and that strategy. And I think there's a couple of key factors. One is clearly disruption, which there's been a lot of talk about lately, right? In terms of primarily fintech, technological disruption. And I think as CSDs, we always got to be very mindful about what those disruptive threats are and being able to embrace strategies and approaches that position us best to prevent disintermediation and that disruption. And I think that's a relevance question as well. It comes to that. I think the other area is competition. And I mean, we all operate CSDs in different capacities where there is potentially, if there's a smaller local CSD, perhaps you don't have that direct local competition as others or ICSDs might do. That being said, you always got to, I think, recognize it's a global marketplace, right? And we're all looking to attract global capital to our jurisdictions, issuers, liquidity, and we're competing for that wallet globally. And so I think every jurisdiction has to think very carefully in how they're servicing their market in that international community as best they can. I think For those CSDs that are for profit, there's certainly shareholder return considerations, and usually we don't talk about that much, but that's the practical and the reality situation is that we're here to drive growth for our shareholders and increase value. And so I think there's a lot of activities as part of your strategy development that plays a part there. And then lastly, and I think the obvious one, but it's a very key first principle, is market demand, right? Everything that we do is driven by the demands of the market and the clients and the constituents, which obviously necessitates playing that trusted advisory role and having deep and meaningful relationships, engagements, and conversations with the market to understand where your local market's going, where the rest of the world is going, what are the friction points among your constituents, and where do you fit in that value chain? And a lot of that will very much drive, I think, the strategic considerations. And so if I sum all of those things up, I think there's an element here for CSDs, and certainly it applies very much to ourselves in Canada, around redefining what CSD's function is beyond its traditional core value of depository clearing and settlement and asset servicing. And I think there's a huge diversification element that exists there, diversification of products and services, getting into adjacent markets and verticals within your business. It is a scale business. And I think in order to grow and meet those objectives that I just outlined, you got to be really thoughtful about how you're going to grow and expand your business beyond the obvious role that we all play in terms of preserving market resiliency, stability, robustness, risk management, so on and so forth. So I'll save some. I think there's some more points to be made around the diversification and how you do that and why that's important. And really, it's about redefining what it means to be a CSD.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And Sam, from your perspective with Clearstream, how are you guys approaching the future, and how do you see that things playing out?
So thanks, Jen. It's hard to be at a wrap-up session and at the end of the row as well, right? But no, joking aside, so I have responsibility for security services, which is a segment within Deutsche Börse, which is basically all of the Clearstream CSDs. And for us, I mean, I think what's interesting is we have 3 CSDs, right? And some of those dimensions are very different. You touched on it there a little bit, Kevin, which is, we have competition in a different way, right? So we have competition in the ICSD. We are starting to see competition in the CSD environment, and I think T2S brings some of that into the equation, opening up the marketplace in Europe. So when we think about our business, we think about it as a platform. We think about it as a platform because not only is it around our technology and how we drive the business, scale is a key component, absolutely, I think, for us. But it's about being able to offer those services over the platform, and to do that, whether it's the Luxembourg CSD, whether it's the ICSD, or whether it's the German CSD, and it depends on the products and the needs of the clients, and to be able to do that kind of agnostically across the platform. But it also means that within that platform for us is the ability to be able to offer other services, things that we're good at, right? Either within that group of CSDs or to other institutions and to our clients. And I think we've embraced that quite heavily also with regards to how we look at technology. And you touched on it as well, Kevin, around disruption, fintechs. We've done quite a number of investments into fintechs, and they have been not just investment for profit, so to speak, but they've been investments from a strategic perspective. And what that's done is just allowed us to, I suppose, spread our wings a little bit in terms of the services we offer and within that value chain. And that is changing. And I think that's an interesting thing within the CSDs. We're important, we're relevant, and I think, Guillaume, you said it about trust. That won't go away. But what is changing is that the demands from the clients are becoming different. Data's enabling transparency, and because data's enabling transparency, some of the clients are going direct to the source. And so you're seeing different needs from the intermediaries in that value chain. So I think for us, it's really about kind of embracing that platform, looking at the new technology, and working with a number of partners.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you, guys. So if we think about, now we've set some of the visions, what are some of the efforts underway that are paving the path forward for your future vision? So Javier, if you could maybe start.
Sure. As I was saying, in our strategy, apart obviously from the obvious vision that we all have in terms of making our business more diversified and grow, I think what is really, really key in this moment for us in the merger between BME and SIX is to make the post-trade worlds connect properly. So for us, the connectivity between the three CSDs we operate, which is basically the Spanish, the Swiss, and the digital, for us has been extremely important. It is extremely important to give customer optionality in terms of where they want to register the issuance, for example. The fact of having a European Union CSD and a non-European Union one gives the opportunity for issuers to choose jurisdiction, to say, I want to do it within the European law or outside the European Union law. No? And also the possibility to issue digital, I think, is very important. No? So those three, for us, are a very important offering, but at the same time, the possibility to build a bridge between the three of them in jurisdiction, but also in terms of with a bilateral account and starting to work together. Also the possibility to issue digital and come back to the traditional world, for us is a breakthrough. So we want to do that also in the opposite side, so we could also think about turning a traditional world into digital holdings. And this is what I think helps the customers as well to find optionality in how they want to play their needs. So that's just an example. I will not take more time in this moment, thank you.
No, I love watching what you guys are doing. I'm pretty passionate about innovation and thinking about how the future changes. And so I really enjoyed watching how you guys have approached the digital aspect and bringing those two together. So thank you. And Guillaume, from your perspective, what are the products or process improvements that you guys are really focused on to help get you to that future vision?
Jennifer, if you allow me first a personal view because we are talking about strategy, I was wondering probably it is something for CSD, but also beyond the CSD community and maybe beyond our industry. I find it a little bit, more and more difficult to really set a long-term vision in our changing landscape. And we see that the horizon timing for setting up a strategy is reducing in a way, and at the same time, the horizon timing for implementing a strategy is increasing because of the complexity of our systems, because of all the developments that are going with the implementation necessity of the strategy. And so we may end up having a kind of crossing point, when between the two horizon timing. And I think it's, in a way, implementing the strategy is becoming more strategic than the strategy itself. To be.
I think that's a fair point.
But just to come back to your questions, what the clients are expecting in terms of new products, new services, where they are expecting, as you mentioned, efficiency, security, more connections, and more services. We have discussed a lot of this stuff already. Just one that we have not discussed is security in terms of the level of resilience that we need to provide in the context of the cyber threat. And I was a little bit surprised during these 3 days that we have not pronounced the term cyber. And I'm sure that for all of us, cyber is still very, very high on our agenda and on the list of risks that we are facing. And so beyond all the new services that we can provide around data, around DLT, etc., I will not go into all the details of what we are trying to achieve. I think, some basics like a full resilience of our infrastructure is also a full and a very strong expectations of our clients. So we should not forget this facet also of our strategy.
Great, thank you very much. The next question is really about partnerships and how they play a role in the strategic future of CSDs and meeting the needs of clients. So with that, Sam, I'd love to start with you. What's your view on partnerships and how do you guys approach this for your clients?
So I think, I mean, I talked about the platform, and I think for us is that we've opened that up, not because we want to necessarily be a direct competitor, but to enable, and if we go back to the previous panel, right, that enablement is connecting to countries, but it's also connecting to other CSDs, and it's connecting to other products that are available. And just this week, of course, we launched with TMX, our collateral platform, which has come out and stemmed out of somebody that Kevin hired back in the day, who happened to be part of Straight, who are here, who also use our platform on the collateral management side. And ASX in Australia use our collateral management on the platform side. And so it made logical sense that, from a CDS perspective, that, we could help them enable what they need in their marketplace. But it's CDS operating everything, right? I mean, from a client-facing perspective, from a marketplace Canada perspective, it's CDS. And I think, that's the value proposition that we can offer. But at the same time, Kevin's completely kind of, facing off to the marketplace for his business. And we've basically developed that within the last 6 to 8 months, right? So just in terms of the speed to market for, Kevin and his team, it's been fantastic because, if you can enable effectively a collateral management platform in a market which today is purely bilateral, right, within that time frame, I think those are the sorts of things that we're starting to see more and more. So that's the value in partnerships from my perspective. I don't know, Kevin, if you've got anything else to add.
Yeah, no, and I think I'll relate it back to one of my earlier points about looking at expanding your addressable market, right? And I think partnerships are a necessity to be able to do that, right? Because you have a variety of different needs and constituents, which you can't be all things to all people with the capabilities that you have, right? And so you need to seek out those partners, and whether that's other CSDs, whether that's service providers, technology providers, or what have you, to be able to help you execute on your growth strategy in that approach. And partnerships are extremely critical to that. And again, a good example is with Clearstream, in terms of we had the market, we knew there was a need for the infrastructure that existed, we understood the client demands and the requirements, and we certainly weren't prepared to do the heavy lifting of, from scratch, greenfield, building a whole collateral system. So you go out to those in the industry that have the expertise to be able to do that. So, partnerships are extremely critical in that respect. It's also about looking at building, and there's been lots of discussion, certainly on the last panel as well, around building kind of a global ecosystem as well, right? And I think it's incumbent on all of us in terms of not looking so insular at your own market, which you have to do, and you can't take your obviously your eye off of your core business. But I think we're increasingly seeing the globalization of all markets, right? There are no borders in terms of financial transactions really anymore. And so, I think it's incumbent on all of us to start thinking globally, and you can really only do that with a partnership type of model. So I think it's critical to the future, not only of our organizations, but the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think my favorite car happens to be an Audi, and it's the only car I've ever owned, to be honest with you.
I own one as well.
Okay, but when I get in that car and I think about all the parts that are in there, right? The speakers, the tires, like et cetera. Audi doesn't make all of those, right? They partner with the brand names and bring that best of breed end-to-end service together for their customers. So I think the more that we can also start thinking like that and bringing each other together where it makes sense, it adds a lot of value to clients at the end of the day. If we transition from partnerships, in a little bit, there's some alignment here, but if you think about what partnerships do bring, they do help with standardization in terms of products and services on a global basis, but how else do we think about opportunities to create harmonization and standardization to enable better interconnectedness between global CSDs in the future? So Javier, I was wondering if you had some thoughts on that.
No, I think the thought is that we need to sit down and make it happen. I think the biggest harmonization process we've lived through in Europe is target to securities, obviously, with the connection to ECB for settlement. But I think we are a little bit short of what we expected from that that connectivity, in the sense that most of us thought it was the beginning of a possibility to have access to more assets, to all assets that are in Europe, and access to, through bilateral links to the rest of CSDs, to be able to produce what I said before, breaches and customer optionality and possibilities to do more. This has fallen very short of in reality. I think other panels talked about it before. So that is an area in which clearly we need more harmonization. We need to harmonize and standardize corporate actions, proxy voting. This is really an area where what I was saying before. We really need the help of everybody involved, SWIFT, regulators, a way to make STP processes the dominators of what happens in the post-trade arena. Otherwise, we will continue to increase the cost and the operational risk around it if we don't come to a really harmonized way of connecting to each other, as Guillaume was saying, connecting data and making data available. I think all those processes is in my opinion, the main focus in the operational part and the harmonization part in the years to come.
Thank you. And I know, Kevin, you mentioned, we're getting more global. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, it was just interesting in that last panel, the status quo has a lot of inertia, right? And that's always the challenge for a lot of us in terms of standardization and harmonization. We just saw that. I was really shocked in that last panel with the survey around the adoption timelines to ISO 20022, around 7 to 10 years. And I get it. I think we all understand why and what the challenges are, but that's a long time in our industry to implement change and get to a standardization. So I'm just stating the obvious in terms of clearly that's a challenge despite everybody's best efforts to do that.
Yeah, great. Sam?
Yeah, I was just it's showing my age, but I remember 7775, but and I remember the adoption of 7775 to ISO 15022. But the reality, I think, is with those standards comes more complexity, and 20022 is a really, really good example of that, because the idea is to make it simpler going forward, but there's a complexity in the implementation of it. And I think the challenge with that is that obviously that takes time, and hence your point to the how long it's going to take. But I do think we do have a responsibility in that regard, right? I mean, we certainly are a kind of a profit-making organization, so we have an investment budget and we have a change budget, and we're spending a lot of it on digital and data, but the reality is we also have to spend it on the regulatory changes and those, let's say, less interesting changes that just have to be done, right? I mean, in the European marketplace, we just had that just recently with T2 and T2S merging, which changed the way in which we do cash payments to 20022, right? And that was driven by, obviously, effectively the European Central Bank, right? I mean, at the end of the day. And that's the hard thing. I think we, as pretty global institutions, we do have a responsibility to embrace that. The challenge, I think, though, is, and we all face this challenge, and particularly even the banks face this challenge, is how quickly our clients can move, right? And sometimes we don't have a choice in the case of the European Central Bank. But when we do have a choice, certainly, our clients will push back, and then, they might go to somebody else to look for their business somewhere else because, they can offer the old standard, right? So it's not only the fact that we're moving to the new standard, we've still got to offer the old standard at the same time. And I think we're going to have to continue to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great segue into the next question, which is modernization, right? So many of our organizations have been around for a significant period of time, and FMIs broadly and globally are thinking about modernization, but yet any spend on technology has to compete with the spend for regulatory compliance, for maintaining legacy systems, just to do your BAU, and then you also have to think about the new systems, as you guys have mentioned, on digital, and so how do you think about digital transformation, meeting client needs with all of those challenges with regards to broader modernization? So Guillaume, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, obviously, where we are, of course, fully engaged, like everyone in this room, in the kind of quite far-reaching digital agenda, digitalizing assets, processes, services, etc. So we are doing that by our own. We are also partnering with certain fintechs who also help us going fast and also obtain new ideas or new dynamics. And you may have seen Greenomy, the fintech in CSD reporting services, or Goji, a digitalized platform for onboarding investors into private equity vehicles. So we are really engaged, but well, that's obvious, but I think was like many of us here today. But coming back to what was implicit, or maybe even explicit in your question about, well, how are you managing all this at the same time? And I think that's the challenge, because yes, we are expected to experiment new technology. We are expected to maintain the legacy and innovate also on the legacy. We are expecting also, of course, to implement regulatory changes, and as mentioned by Sam, to bring the market together, because we are not alone in this journey. So yes, I think the challenge is here, and especially if we look at a little bit forward-looking on potential new DLT system replacing or going in parallel to our own system. What I think where the challenge is not in the transformation, but it is in the transition to this transformation. And in a way, it is more easy to design the destination, the end destination, than really to design the way to go there, you know. And so for me, the real challenge is transition to innovation, but it is also a great opportunity for CSDs, because we are the one who can provide this transition and not the others. And so it's an opportunity, it's a responsibility, but well, it's an amazing future at least.
And Kevin, our organizations have talked about modernization quite a bit. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, and just also picking up on the transition point is a very interesting one, because and I think you touched on it, is it requires you to be able to have to run multiple complex future vision projects in parallel, because the time sequencing is not the same in terms of when the industry is ready, the participant ready, where the capabilities are. So by way of example, and you alluded to it, Jennifer, we'd undertaken, about 4 years ago, a process in terms of completely replacing our infrastructure and our technology from the depository, clearing, settlement, entitlements, tax, everything. And that's a huge undertaking. But if you look at the time period in which any large project like that, you have to define the requirements, you have to build buy-in from the stakeholders, including if you have a board, executive management, you got to secure funding. Even just getting to that point is probably an education internally, decision-making in terms of how you're going to approach and solution it, and yet alone execution and delivery. And so those are long life cycle type of projects, and as a result, you can't be putting all your eggs into that one particular basket, because by the time you come to market with that, you're already 4 years behind, right? So I think the point was made. You need to be able to run those in parallel, and that requires significant capabilities from a culture perspective, from a technology, from a staffing perspective and resourcing, and certainly alignment internally to be able to execute on those things.
That's a really good point. The next question, Kevin and Javier, I just want to get your thoughts on this statement. So digital transformation will shape our existence in the future in a fundamental way, but will be gradual as the infrastructure that has been built to support securities processing on a global basis has been built over decades. Does this mean we're limited in the change that we're able to see from digital technologies in the next, to Guillaume's point, the next few years? And are there pockets of opportunities that provide a launching pad for us in the future?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
Let me give you a longer answer, if I may. This is George Gershwin's song, Embrace Me, as you said, Sam. Are we going to embrace digitalization, yes or no? With all these problems that we have, obviously, in the transition period, and I think it's irreplaceable, following the lyrics of the song, because this is the new technology. And just a couple of thoughts on this topic. One is that I think we have a policy problem here that goes back to your argument on resources. So we would also have to align with regulators. What are the priorities? I mean, I think Jesus was saying it the other day, the three orchestras playing together. I like more the analogy of the jazz orchestra, by the way, because I like the possibility to have your own moment and a little bit more competition than just the score. No? But having said that, I think we really need to align what do we need to do first. And I don't want to challenge now the T+1 thing, but I will. Because is it really this the priority for the industry? Is this what the buy side wanted? Is this what the whole industry wanted or needed? Or was it better to have a prior debate on whether or not, if we are all convinced that digital is the next technology, we should put all our eggs into that basket of going to the next technology? And in your analogy of the car, not going to the diesel engine to make it much better. I have a diesel car, don't get me wrong. But is it better to try to put our efforts into what we all agree is going to be the next one? It's just a question for all of us. And finally, if I look at the results of the panel on when the digitalization process was going to be done, and taking everything you said on the difficulty of this, I have the impression that we are this is just a thought, that we are looking at this like this is going to happen in 10 years. Oof, good, no? Good for us, no? In the sense that this is such a revolution that if it takes longer, a little bit better, which is, I could subscribe to that. But my question would be, are we doing the same thing as the taxi drivers were doing before Uber was introduced? Are we doing the same thing that other industries were doing, saying, no, this is going to happen in 10 years? And what we have experienced here is that all of us are already investing and experiencing with digital. The central banks are experiencing with CBDC. So everybody is super engaged, and this is going to take 10 years? I question it. I know it's very difficult. But to some extent, I have the feeling that some of us maybe, will make a breakthrough in the market and establish the next service that will make the rest run. So I'm not sure that when we talk among ourselves about how we see the future evolving, we are trying to comfort ourselves in what the market will demand from us very aggressively in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kevin, thoughts?
Yeah, well, just again, I think I agree it's going to take a while, right? I mean, again, just back to the survey on standardization, yet alone deploying new next-gen type of technology, we're talking a while, but that certainly doesn't detract, I think, from your point, Sam. It's like we have a responsibility, I think, as CSDs in the place that we hold in the market in terms of operators of resilient, stable infrastructure, proper risk management, good governance in the market, investor protection, issuance integrity, all of those good things that we do, we kind of have the right to play, so to speak, and I think people look and the industry looks to organizations such as ours to be able to try to move those goalposts forward a little bit. And I like what you had, I think it was yourself, Jennifer, on a panel yesterday, I think it was, or the day before. I think you were equating it to the Apple example, is that sometimes we just don't know what we don't know until you get deeper into experimentation, right? And is it a matter of you're dragging the market with you as you discover these things, or are you only going to build for the value that people see in front of them right away? And that's a tough balance to strike, because there's a lot of investment and time and energy involved to build something that may not have the return, right? But I think we all recognize digital technologies, DLT, even if you expand it into machine learning, AI, and so on, there's going to be a place for it. I mean, it's loud and clear, and it's just, I think it's all of us are trying to figure out what are the practical applications and where does it make sense within our businesses.
If I can just add, I mean, so I'm relatively new to Clearstream, other than some of my colleagues here. I'm just over 3.5 years. In those 3 years, and of course we had COVID, and somebody mentioned in a previous panel or in one of the speeches earlier just around the kind of digital evolution that's happened through COVID. In Clearstream, we had no cloud access. We now have all of the regional exchanges in Germany, all of the settlements are in the public cloud, right? We didn't have a data store in the public cloud. We now have that. We weren't investing in anything in digital from a digital asset perspective 3.5 years ago, right? And we're now spending 40% of our entire change budget is just on digital and data, just on digital and data. So I think that just shows you how quickly things are changing, to your point, right? I mean, it's just, it is not going to be 7 to 10 years. I firmly believe that. I think it is happening, and it's happening pretty quick. It's a bit scary, actually, how quick, right?
So, if folks heard me speak the other day, and I mentioned the Uber example, talking about that product improvement, the one thing that I didn't wrap up with was in the U.S., the FAA is clearing the way for skyways for effectively sky taxis. So 4-seaters, no pilots. The pilots are on the ground operating these things that are going to fly at 2,500 feet to 4,000 feet in the air, get you from airports to main cities. It's really interesting. Now, who knows how long that will take to get approved? But it's just another. And again, I never would have thought that. I probably still won't get in one of those in the first year, but I don't know. After that, after it gets a little bit of credibility under its legs, maybe we'll see. So interesting. You mentioned, Sam, you just mentioned data and digitization, right? So if we take digital assets off the table for a minute, we just focus on digitization and data, that is playing, I think, in some ways, a much more important role in our industry right now. So Sam and Guillaume, just wanted to get your thoughts on, I think, Sam, you mentioned a few things already on how data fits in to your vision and where you guys are at, but, just even thinking about the advancements like AI, machine learning, large language models, like how are you guys thinking about that for the future?
So I suppose we look at it from data as an enabler, right? So, and that's from our perspective has actually been a process of, firstly internally looking at ourselves, and so when we enable, data access for our employees, what does that mean, right? And what are we trying to achieve? Well, the reality is what we've done is we've put, pretty much all of the transactional data now in a central store. And then we've been able to do that in a way that we've enabled, our teams, and anybody can have access if they want to, right? To be able to access that data, and then to be able to use it in the way that they want. And that may just be ad hoc searches, it may be reporting for our regulators, it may be, there's 100 things I could go through, right, that you could do. But we put in a tool set around that so that, actually there's some things that you want to look at every week, right? Whether that's dashboards or things that the businesses are starting to sort of try and understand at any one point in time what's happening in our business. And that's interesting enough. What's that then done? It started to just kind of educate our teams, just understanding how powerful data is. And I think that's when you start to flip, right? That's when you start to see that ideas start to come into play, because I think we were all struggling as an industry, what's the data that we've got that's so great, right? So we now, and you do the same in Euroclear, right? Which is providing liquidity data of the fixed income transactions that are on our platform because they're OTC. The reality is they're not exchange traded, so it's not publicly out there from an information perspective. But we're now providing that from the post-trade environment to the pre-trade environment, right? If I think back 5 years ago, me thinking about kind of providing data to the traders, they'd use swear words at you, So it's something that's kind of evolving incredibly fast, and I think we're moving into that predictive and performance data, which is getting in that interest that touches on the AI, machine learning type capabilities. And there is stuff out there, right? We have a predictive settlement, which is a tool, right? It's not going to solve all of your settlement problems. It's one tool that allows your clients, or that allows our clients to be able to sort of assess where have I got potential risks and how do I deal with them, right? And maybe Guillaume.
Great, Guillaume.
I fully subscribe to what has been said by Sam. Maybe 2 or 3 points on data. First, we believe that CSDs are a place of data, but also a place for data. What we are thinking is really because of our, I would say, central positioning, as I was mentioning at the very start, because of our role as trusted third party because of the connections that we have put in place. We are the one that can create this hub of data where all the stakeholders would be able to plug in and use those data for efficiency in terms of operations, for new services, whatever. And so it's important to have in mind that it's not only CSD using their data, because, well, we are a point of gathering data, but it's also offering a kind of utilities for data of others, so shifting from the pure sequential model that we have today, with data transferred to one actor to the other down the chain, from the issuer to the agent, to the listing place, to the clearer, to the clearing member, etc., with all this risk of incidents or mistakes, and shifting from this model to a more global, centralized model. So this is what we aim at proposing to the market in Euroclear. And maybe the last point on data, just another surprise on my side. I think when we are discussing the DLT business case, we are focusing a lot on transactional business case, and maybe because the pilot regime, I would say, is driving us towards these kinds of model for clearing, for settlement, or for trading. But we see that it's not that easy to find, I would say, obvious business case in this area. While in the sharing of information, well, we see obviously very strong business case for using DLT technology, sharing KYC data, sharing tax data. We have discussed the difficulties that we have around the withholding tax. The ESG data, of course, obviously the ESG data, moving from securities to enhanced securities. I mean, securities with all the data attached to the securities. All this is would be very valuable in a DLT environment. And I'm a little bit surprised that we are still focusing so much on transactions and not that much on information sharing, which I think the DLT is very promising.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. Kevin, do you have something?
Just an observation, and I think the exchange or the front office space has been a lot more advanced in terms of generating data, insights, analytics than the post-trade business. And I think we can take a lot of lessons from that aspect of the market. And because I think there's a lot of opportunities, Sam, to your point, in terms of utilizing data as an enabler, but also monetizing and commercializing those data sets in an appropriate way as well for value to the industry. And if you look at the exchange side of the business, that's quite mature, right? And there's a lot of AI being driven even on order types on exchange. We introduced a crumbling quote where we can move the quote on the market based on a predictive AI model on where the market's going and so on. And so I think just there's a lot of lessons there. And one lesson that we experienced was approaching your data strategy from not a technical perspective, but from a business and market perspective. Because I think you made the point that it's not, the technology's there. You can get the tools are there. There's cloud, there's AI, there's people that and there's firms that can offer that. It's understanding what's the value of those data sets, what insights can I compile with that myriad of data that CSDs have, and what's going to drive the most value for our clients. And that actually takes market and business knowledge to do that. And so just any advice, I would start there as opposed from a technical perspective.
No, thank you. And so the last question in our last few minutes here, I'd just like to ask each of the panelists, employees are they are the most important investment asset that we have. We can't deliver upon our future visions without them. And a lot of employees are very concerned and are very interested in working for organizations that support ESG and DE&I. If you guys could talk a little bit about just your maturity level on those two components and how you bring culture into your strategy, that would be great. Guillaume?
Well, obviously, it is at the very top of the agenda. We aim to be a great place to work, and in the ESG policy that we have put in place, there are many things around, of course, all the important topics on ESG. And you know, in the Euroclear group, we are 4,500 people, 80 nationalities. So there's probably just one or two countries in the world who have not a representative in the Euroclear employee, but it creates a lot of diversity and a lot of engagement and a lot of responsibility also for us as an organization. What I think is just one point on which I would like to make a comment is on the education and educating all people. Becoming a learning organization, and I think this is absolutely important as a strategic point for the future, meaning really having our people constantly learning, constantly approaching new topics, new issues, even out of their natural scope, I would say, of competence. And so it means having people really willing to improve, willing to learn, and it's our duty as an organization to offer them this possibility, but it is also having people sharing their knowledge. And I think it's extremely important into our organization because we have many experts, and we have heard many experts across along over these 3 days of each of the CSDs. We need in our organizations also to promote a culture of sharing of expertise, and it's a point which is very high in the strategic agenda of the Euroclear group.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Javier?
Yeah, I think, first of all, ChatGPT will not replace our people. Okay. This is, in my opinion, is not going to happen. That is one. The labor market is tough. I think we all experiencing the same thing, is that we're probably all of us born, I was born in a situation in which to work for 6 group of BME was a fantastic thing. So I wouldn't go to the first employment interview saying, yeah, okay, you know, tick in the box. Do you follow ESG principles? Yes, tick. Do I have career opportunities? Yes, tick. Do I have? So that was not our culture. We joined companies which are in our career with the attitude of, I want to work for this company, prove myself, and progress. No? So you were not actually asking for too many things apart from the salary, you know, in the first meeting. This has completely changed, and we need to adapt to that in the sense that it is a much more demanding talent quest in this moment, much more difficult to attract talent for all of us, and we need to prove, obviously, to the labor market that we are attractive companies, as Guillaume was describing, in terms of culture, in terms of openness. I think this is very important. But what I think is also very important, and has to do with how we are organized today and how we think about it, at least maybe my generation, is that young people joining our companies will ask for all of this, but once they are inside, they would like to learn, but they would like to progress. And career opportunities are not so easy to devise in any big company like ours. It's not so easy. So we probably have to get to a mindset in which the more veterans will have to adapt to a situation where the hierarchies are less strict, less hierarchical, and there is much more flow of people taking bigger or smaller responsibilities depending on delivery, depending on moment of the career, and so on and so forth. And this is a cultural change that, in my opinion, is behind the scenes, behind the cloth. And not so many people talk about it, but in my opinion, is part of what we need to retain, apart from education and sharing and having a nice environment. It's also the career opportunity requires the company to change the way we are structured and to change the way we see our position in each company, in our company.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Javier. Kevin and Sam, any last comments on this?
I'll make it really short. I think it's so true, the saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Meaning if you can have the best strategy that exists, and if you don't have the culture to be able to support the employees to execute on it, it's futile. So, and I think that's even more, we've all experienced that through this period of the pandemic, work from home environment, the great resignation, how you want to label it. I think that's even more important, where employees are looking for purpose and shared vision as part of the culture in order to want to work somewhere. And so I think we've all been learning over the last little while to put that focus on culture, and to your point, because there's a war for talent out there, right? And there's a sense of employee empowerment that we can't ignore, and I think culture is a key to that.
Just really shortly, I mean, we've now put in our ESG steerco, which is an internal committee that has basically been developed by the staff, right? So because I think if you don't embrace it, which is all what you guys have been saying, if you don't embrace it, initially I would say that was more about kind of, you know, can we have electric cars? Can we have a garden outside to be able to grow vegetables, right? And things like that. That's where it started off. And why I was just going through my iPad, because where it's ended up is I got sent a presentation about, you know, IMF Sustainable Call for Action supported by Clearstream, where we do a sustainable bond in, you know, sustainable development. And that's the same group that were sort of, you know, planting the vegetables in the garden, right? So I think my point is that if you don't embrace it, and when you do embrace it, it's actually quite incredible what comes out in terms of ideas out of these very, very, very passionate, youthful people that have clear principles and values that will drive the way we do things going forward.
Great point. Thank you very much. Well, with that, I want to thank our panelists, Sam, Kevin, Javier, and Guillaume. Thank you so much for your insights today. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.
Maybe I would like to just ask audience if there was any questions. Okay, yeah. Safe travels. Yeah.
I'm Yasushi Kanzaki from Justic Japan, and from this panel and the discussions the last 3 days, I've learned a lot what's going on in the Europe and in the North America, but I felt a little bit pity because the Asian perspective was minimal during the discussions, and so we have maybe we may have some different cultures or practices, but the biggest challenge is time difference. Actually, we are working while people elsewhere is sleeping, so still this time difference is the biggest challenge for us. And even the DTC survey on the T+1 readiness, the custodians and investors in other regions might suffer more from the adoption of T+1. And T+0, if it's adopted in the US or Europe, it's kind of nightmare for maybe investors in Asia because there might be more squeeze in the time for kind of business. So my question is whether still this time difference has some effect or limits in terms of globalization of the industry, or do you think some technological change like AI might be able to overcome this challenge in the future? I'd like to know some insight about it. Thank you.
I'll give it a quick, well, just a perspective, right? I think what it is driving is 24/6.5 cache capability. So, I mean, the biggest issue, obviously, with T+1 that we're seeing from our Asian clients is quite honestly the ability to be able to fund a T+1 transaction. And so the more we move to that kind of 24-hour cache environment, which would really, really help and enable that, I think, at a global level. The other thing I think, and it's a fair point around not having enough on Asia in this conference. And I think one of the things that Asia has to crack is also to be able to tear down some of the borders from the capital market flows, which, you know, Europe has started to do in many regards. The Americas is very much well connected, right? But when we think about that, and just to pivot that to the technology. So actually the technology, I think, in Asia will take off quite significantly to be able to effectively bridge those barriers that are there today, right? So I think that's going to be something that's going to happen quite quickly from an Asian marketplace perspective. I don't know if there's any other comments.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, it's Bev Furman from Straight South Africa. I just want to say to Sam and Kevin, you are welcome. We shared expertise. I unfortunately cannot compete with immigration, but good luck to the Clearstream implementation in CDS with collateral management. Steve is awesome. The question I'd like to ask, Sam, you mentioned that 40% of your change budget is digital and data. And then Kevin, you hinted at the concept that CSDs are bad at monetizing our data. Certainly the engagements I've had this week, I've asked the question, what percentage of your CSD revenue is from data? And I'm concerned that, unlike exchanges, most of the answers have been less than 5% of a CSD's revenue is off data. And yet every single one of you on the panel now have mentioned data as your strategy. What would you each say is the reasons for our inability to monetize the wealth of data that we are sitting on as CSDs?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I'm not sure I have a complete answer to it, but just put some context and further your point. If we look at the exchange side of our business, amongst TMX Group, which again operates derivatives markets, equity exchanges, and ATSs, we make more money on data revenue than we do on our transactional revenue. So that's, to your point, that's a lot different than in the post-trade world, significantly different. And I'm not exactly sure what our stats are, but I would guess it's probably, you know, the less than 5% or definitely less than 10% of our overall revenue in post-trade is attributed to data. The reasons for that, I think we tend to get caught up in the regulation in terms of, certainly in Canada, in terms of it's fairly vague to some degree around what our rights are around that data. There's also the tension that sometimes exists between your rights of use as a CSD and your view of that versus your participant view, regardless of what your member or contractual agreements actually say. I think there's a wide diversity of opinion, certainly amongst the customer and the client base in terms of, is it your data or is it my data? And I think that's a very contentious topic, and my sense is most CFDs probably have been reluctant to try to, you know, address that head on. That being said, I think if there's enough will and recognition around what the opportunity is there around data, and again, it's not only about commercialization. I think there truly is value in the insights that can be developed to the benefit of the participants in running their business, managing it more effectively, managing risk more effectively if they have the appropriate data sets and insights from the CSD. I think there's a lot there, and frankly, it just might come down to lack of focus and priority as well.
Thank you. No more questions? I don't see any hands. So thank you to all panelists. Thank you very much. I think that, yep, big applause.